What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to Touchline Talk. Yesterday, Josh, Chris, and I were on a Zoom call, and I jokingly said we should make it a policy here at 110 Sports that when we do our shows, we don't cover anything that happened in the last, 6 or 12 hours before we start so that we're able to be completely prepared and know where we're going to go with everything. Obviously, that's not how it works, and I was completely kidding. But that's the first thing that came to my mind when we saw all the things that have happened so far this morning. So, FIFA President Gianni Infantino is now facing a criminal investigation. This is the man who is supposed to be cleaning up FIFA after his predecessor was removed from office because of bribery and criminal activity. So the Swiss Attorney General, Michael Lauber, has already resigned. He's going to leave at the end of August, but basically, he's the dude who's supposed to be investigating FIFA. But he and Infantino had secret meetings that apparently had some sort of criminal conduct that led to this investigation. So you got the dude who's supposed to actually be running the investigation and holding everybody accountable, and the dude who's now tasked with cleaning up the mess that is FIFA. And they just fall right back into the corruption cycle that has plagued this governing body for, it seems like, ever. I don't even know what to say at this point. It's not surprising. I would almost be more surprised if we actually found out that things had worked well, that Infantino had actually made progress, and that we felt like there was a fair and equitable system going on here. Because this is just who FIFA is. It's ridiculous, but there we are. So, no surprise. Continued corruption in FIFA. We'll see where this investigation goes, what happens to Infantino. It's still, news is coming in. There's not a lot of details. It's unclear exactly what went on. But it's just the most FIFA thing ever for the guy who's supposed to be fixing all of the problems and actually making this a respectable organization, and the guy who's supposed to be holding them accountable, figuring out what happened, investigating, to be working together to make sure neither of those things happen to the extent that they actually should. That's one thing that happened this morning. The other is that Newcastle's new proposed ownership group, primarily Saudi Arabian, but led by Amanda Stavely, decided they're going to back out of buying Newcastle because this process has taken so long. Basically, what the statement said was that their agreement had expired because they can't do anything because they still don't know whether they would actually have been able to buy the club or not. And the holdup here is this thing called the fit and proper person test, which is the Premier League's investigation of potential owners to make sure that the league is comfortable with them, that they are able financially to actually have a Premier League team, all of those things. The problem with this particular situation is sort of twofold. The first one obviously being just the Saudi history of human rights violations and just the optics of essentially the Saudi government owning a Premier League team. There were always questions about that, and Newcastle supporters are sort of mixed on the idea that this could be transformative for this club because of the money that's coming in. This is similar to Manchester City, but also knowing that the source of that money is not what you would want it to be from a morality and respect of humanity perspective. But the bigger problem facing the Premier League, which I think is really the holdup here, is the fact that you also have this TV agreement, obviously with countries around the world, and these accusations that the Saudi government was hacking into feeds and essentially pirating feeds that they weren't supposed to have access to. So this is a financial issue for the Premier League too, that you would be allowing people who are hurting your bottom line and hurting your television contracts, which is obviously what this is about more than anything else from a financial perspective, to now own one of your teams. So that was the even bigger question. Right or wrong, but it very much seemed like when there became a real doubt as to whether this was going to go through, it was more about the television deal and the alleged activity by the Saudis than it was the moral question. Again, right or wrong, but the Premier League has to watch out for its money. So that was sort of the situation it found itself in, and I mean, people need answers. I don't blame them for pulling out. You're starting another season in less than a month. You got to figure out whether Steve Bruce is still going to be your manager. And because of the money you have, just about every player on this team is wondering right now, until this announcement, whether their future is at Newcastle or not. Because some of these names that you've heard linked, and some of these managers, I mean, Mauricio Pochettino, and would be a completely different Newcastle if this takeover had happened. And so they just sort of said, look, we're not going to sit here and wait for this thing forever. It's not working, so we're going to pull out, which leaves Mike Ashley once again in charge of this club, to the dismay of everybody, including Mike Ashley, I would have to think. And Newcastle is right back where it's been for the last at least 5 years. You could argue Ashley's entire tenure pretty much. He wants out. Everybody wants him out, but they just can't get a deal across the line. And all it does is lead to more frustration, more questions, and more uncertainty. Newcastle has to figure this out. Ashley has to find a way to sell this club. If he's not going to invest the time and energy into it needed to make it more successful, it's not in anybody's interest, including his own, for him to continue to be in charge of this team. And I mean, he's trying. So now you got to go back to the drawing board and you got to find another owner, look at the other proposals and people that were interested when you were going ahead with this agreement with Stavely and the Saudi consortium. But that's what's happened so far today. And it's, 11 a.m. Of course, this is going on in Europe, so got some more time in the day that it's already happened there. But my goodness, that was just the first thing I could think of when I saw that news today. Was we were just sort of joking about having to go on the fly with things like this yesterday, and here we are reacting as news is coming in. The other things I wanted to talk about at the top of the show today are, first, the new CONCACAF alignment for qualification for the World Cup because of COVID and the fact that there haven't been, international breaks, and you got to figure out how to do this. CONCACAF has a plan now. The plan is to form an octagon instead of the legendary hex from June 2021 to March 2022. So how this is going to work is that your top 5 teams in CONCACAF, based on rankings, Mexico, the United States, Costa Rica, Jamaica, and Honduras, automatically qualify to the octagon. The other 30 teams in the region are divided into 6 groups of 5. They're all going to play each other, and then the top 3 teams from that are going to join Mexico, the U.S., Costa Rica, Jamaica, and Honduras in the octagon. And then it's going to look like the hex does normally, where you go play everybody. Top 3 teams automatically qualify for the World Cup. The 4th team goes to a playoff. So the end result hasn't changed much at all. But you've got a different qualification process. It doesn't impact the top teams as much. It's basically the same scenario as always. It's not hard to get into the last qualification round, which used to be the hex. The problem is, can you get through the hex? That's where the U.S. really struggled in last go-round in 2018, because now you're playing your Costa Ricas and your Mexicos and things like that. The other benefit here, and why I really think this is a win for everybody, so those 5 teams obviously aren't upset. That's as good as it's going to get, is you just got to qualify through one round. But this also gives everybody else an opportunity, because this whole new ranking system is just kind of a mess. So now your Canadas and El Salvadors and teams like that are in control of their own destiny in terms of having a chance to get to the World Cup. And you've got the opportunity for all of these teams to at least play in meaningful games. You know, of course, we're not going to sit here and talk about all 30 CONCACAF nations, but it's an opportunity for everybody to play, to get experience. So it's really I got to give credit to CONCACAF. I think this is as good as it's going to get for everybody. You're making the best of a bad situation, but I've got no complaints with this. I think it's about as fair as you're going to have considering the circumstances. Over in the championship, one of the more interesting events on the soccer calendar, and William Locke and I talked about this in the last Supporters Corner, you got the championship playoffs going on right now. So Brentford are through. They beat Swansea City 3-2 on aggregate. Swansea won the first leg in Wales 1-0. And then Brentford came home and scored 2 goals in the first 15 minutes and then another one in the 46th minute. And it was 3-0 in the game, 3-1 on aggregate. Didn't seem like anything was going to happen. Swansea looked rather lost. Were not particularly dangerous. And then all of a sudden, you get a mistake from Brentford's captain, central defender Pontus Jansson. Used to be a Leeds United player, by the way. And then Marcel Bielsa decided he didn't want him anymore, so now he's at Brentford. And Ryan Brewster puts a very nice... he chipped the goalie, best way to put it. Really, really nice finish to get Swansea back in the game. They had a couple opportunities after that, but Brentford did a good job, for the most part, seeing out the game. You know, it could have gotten interesting. And it was interesting just from the aspect of Swansea was, only a goal down, when it looked like that wasn't going to happen when Brentford just came out flying. But Brentford hold on in fairly convincing fashion. As I talked about with William is really high on this team. They are far and away the best team from a talent squad perspective in the playoff. It just doesn't mean that much because of how unpredictable this competition is. But you saw it again, just how good this team is going forward. Ollie Watkins is a complete striker. Yes, he scored a goal. He can stretch a defense. But he also was so good holding the ball up, just sort of keeping control of play and tempo. He can really do it all. He had a couple nice passes. Really, really impressed with him. One way or another, I hope he gets a chance in the Premier League because he looked really good and is a very, very good player. And then you also have the creative force on this team, Saeed Benrahma, who almost put the game away twice with 2 really good efforts that just went wide, which kept Swansea within striking distance. This Brentford team is for real. This Brentford team scores goals. This Brentford team is fun to watch going forward, which is not always the case for teams coming up from the Championship to the Premier League. So if they're able to hold this, to continue this and get through, win the playoff final at Wembley, it's going to be a very interesting experiment, in my opinion, to see whether a team like this, who's built this way, can stay up and do some damage in the Premier League. We're going to talk about the other semifinal and our what's next at the end, because that is not complete yet. But congratulations to Brentford. More interesting than I thought it would be, considering how good they were at the beginning of this game. But they get through, and that's all that matters at the end of the day. On the transfer front, transfer window's open. Things are happening. Young U.S. international Sebastian Soto, who just turned 20 this week, is joining Norwich from Hanover, who are playing in second Bundesliga. I don't have too much to say here, but I like this for Soto. He's not ready to be playing in the Premier League, but when you're looking to replace and reinforce a team that you're going to lose some guys because you can't afford to pay their wages because Premier League teams want them, it's just the reality of getting relegated. All of a sudden he has an opportunity to get some good playing time. Of course, it's always valuable to go through the grind of a championship season for anybody. It's just a different kind of mental test than the Premier League or the Bundesliga. So I like this for Soto. I think it makes sense, at least in the short term, see what happens. And, if he plays well, gets some minutes, and Norwich goes back up, all of a sudden he's got a shot in the Premier League. He can always go back to the Bundesliga to a better, more established club if need be. But I like this for both teams. He's a nice young talent, very promising. One of the better young players in this U.S. national team pool who hasn't really established himself at the full team, full first team level. He does have a Bundesliga appearance. He has played in the Bundesliga, but he is by no means a consistent player like a Josh Sargent or a Christian Pulisic, that kind of thing. Weston McKennie, he's sort of a step behind them in his development. So I like this move for Soto. Brighton has been very busy already. Adam Lallana joins from Liverpool. He's not going to be a difference maker that makes this team much more dangerous in attack or is the reason they're going to stay up next season. But, of course, he's coming from a Premier League winning team. He's got plenty of experience in this league. And he can give you that something a little bit different, that little creative piece of ingenuity that Brighton sometimes lacks. So I like it from a fit perspective. You're not going to rely on him to be producing 10 goals and 10 assists for you or anything. But whether he's a starter, whether he's just a substitute coming off the bench, he can make an impact. And Brighton can always use more players like that. The move I'm even higher on is they got Joel Veltman from Ajax. He's got 179 Eredivisie appearances, all for Ajax, 22 caps for the Dutch national team. He's played in the Champions League. He's played in the Europa League. He's seen just about seen just about everything at this point. If I were to pick a club in the Premier League Veltman would be moving to, it would be a little bit higher pedigree than Brighton. I think this is a really good get for them. Again, it's not going to change the complexion of next season dramatically, but they're reinforcing this squad and sort of getting ready to go take that next step. I was impressed with how good they were this year. I was skeptical about their decision to fire Chris Hughton, but Graham Potter is already transforming this team. You saw a lot of progress, especially moving forward and ideas about how they want to play. And these two players are only going to help with that. So I really like what Brighton's doing. And then it also appears that Nathan Ake is officially on his way to Manchester City. This is not a surprise. He was always going to go when Bournemouth got relegated, especially because it sounds like he was one of the few players on that team that you couldn't reduce, they didn't have a built-in salary reduction for relegation. So not only was he one of their most valuable assets, but he also would have been one of the most expensive player to keep. Both of the, regardless of whether he had a relegation clause, wage reduction in there or not, he was not about to go play in the Championship. He's too good for that. And so Manchester City sounds like it's got him. I really like this. There's a reason Pep Guardiola went to go get somebody like Ake, get another central defender. If there's one thing this Manchester City team has been lacking, particularly now that with Rodrigo in there to fill that Fernandinho role as the holding midfielder, it's just consistency at center back. Aymeric Laporte has been good, but you still sort of have a revolving door next to him. John Stones, Nicolas Otamendi, Fernandinho last season. Now you got two established, respected center backs. Ake was good last year on a bad defensive team. He's been good his entire Premier League career. I really like this. It makes all the sense in the world, and he's not super expensive. You don't have to go break the bank to get him. It's not going to prevent Manchester City from bringing in more reinforcements. But he was always going to a top 6 club, whether it was Man City, whether it was Chelsea. So, sounds like he's on his way to the Etihad. I really, really like that for Manchester City. Those were all of the things that I wanted to get to, as I mentioned before all the news broke this morning regarding Gianni Infantino and Newcastle's proposed ownership group pulling out. When we come back, we're going to go into the supporters corner, and I am super, super excited to share this interview with you. It's quite honestly one of my favorite interviews I have ever done, and I've done hundreds at this point. So you're not going to want to miss that. I'm not going to tell you who the interview is with quite yet. We'll introduce it when we come back. We're going to take a quick break. You're watching Touchline Talk on 110 Sports. And welcome back to Touchline Talk on 110 Sports. As I said before, we are going into the supporters corner again this week. However, this is a rather special edition of the supporters corner. Our interview is with former NWSL goalkeeper Caroline Stanley. She played for the Seattle Reign, Sky Blue, and the Orlando Pride. She's been retired for a couple seasons now, but I reached out to Caroline to sort of get her perspective on what she saw in the NWSL Challenge Cup. She obviously knows this league and this league's players really well. She's going to mention that she's still very well connected. She still talks to players in this league. She's also married to Baltimore Orioles pitcher John Means. So when you hear her talking about her husband and how he's become an NWSL fan, it's not just some random dude. This is a starting pitcher for a Major League Baseball team, which is really cool. So, without further ado, here's our conversation with former NWSL goalkeeper Caroline Means. Hi, Caroline. Thanks so much for joining us today. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
First thing I want to start with is just when you saw this announcement that the NWSL was going to do this Challenge Cup, it was going to be in Utah, they were going to use the bubble, the fact that everybody was going to get paid whether they wanted to play or chose not to, that this was going to be the first league in the U.S. to come back and get team competitions going again. What was your initial reaction when you saw kind of what the NWSL's plan was?
Yeah, so I had actually been told by a current player and one of my good friends before the announcement that this was going to happen. And it was kind of in the early stages before they really had a good grasp on what it was going to look like. And to be honest, my first reaction was, there's no way this is going to work. You're looking at the MLB. My husband plays in MLB.
Yep.
Not even talking about coming back. The NFL is so far in the future that, it's kind of ominous if they're going to start. And obviously the NBA was just kind of starting to put together what is now their bubble. And I was thinking, how is the NWSL, this league who is historically not known for doing things the right way necessarily, going to get this done? And then when obviously the commissioner rolled out all of the parameters of it, I was so excited. And not only for the players to get the chance to actually play because they've been working so hard for so long, but just what you said, that they were going to get paid whether they opted out or played, which is huge, especially because the league historically, a lot of people have cut their careers short because of payment or continued their career on when maybe it's time to move on because it is a paycheck, and that transition out of playing is very scary and unknown for a lot of people. But just the way they did it and going to Utah, which I think was so perfect. And obviously just the Utah ownership sacrificing so much time, energy, money to get this rolling. I was so excited. And obviously it's huge that they were the first professional sports teams to come back. I think it's amazing for the league, and it shows that they are forward thinking now. They have the right people in the leadership roles, and I was really excited to watch the games.
It's really interesting. You talked about sort of the perception in your personal experience. Can you put in perspective just how far you feel like this league has come from when you were even playing just a couple of years ago to the fact that you got through this tournament almost flawlessly and you put a product on the field and it seemed to work to perfection? How much big of a change has there really been?
I don't even know where to start. As I was watching this, I'm about almost 6 months pregnant right now, 5.5. And I turned to my husband and I was like, do you think I could come back? Because this is something I want to be a part of. I mean, just the world-class coaching they have now. When I played, coaches weren't vetted. I won't get into details about some of my experiences, specifically my second year playing, but there was no across the board, league-wide just standards that you had to meet. And you're looking here, seeing how the medical staff has made it so there's no positive tests. And I know the bubble was really demanding mentally for these girls to be in, but the league has come so far in such a short amount of time. And that's not only from the commissioner's office, but that's from also the NWSLPA. They have set in their standards, they've made demands, but also they've been flexible and working and understanding that this is going to be a process to grow the league. But it was more than exciting to see the changes. And I mean, even the uniforms, like the uniforms finally fit. Like we're making cool uniforms that people want to buy. I know that sounds like a small thing, but I told my husband as we were watching, he watched every game, by the way, like new NWSL fan. He was so into it. He's got nicknames for players. He's got his favorites. I mean, he is huge Savannah McCaskill fan now.
Okay.
He's like, that's my girl. Get her on the field. Get her the ball. So we had a ton of fun with it, but like just the evolution of the jersey for me, because I remember that was such a struggle, like quit putting me in all pink, please. And they've got these sweet red jerseys and black jerseys, and like just the way that they're creating an identity with each team makes it more distinguishable. And I think that really grows the fan base. And as a player, it just makes you feel more legit. Like it actually makes you feel like a pro. So just that whole evolution and these short couple years since I've been out of the league has been really exciting to see.
And moving on to the field, you sort of mentioned your husband's analysis there. Were there any teams or players in particular that stood out to you that either just sort of caught you by surprise or went to another level during this competition that you hadn't seen before?
You know what? Savannah McCaskill really stood out to me, and just how on the ball she got for a Chicago team that has had a ton of change over the last couple years. And I know she was great for Sky Blue, but I really liked her in that role, kind of starting the attack and like bouncing off the line, but also making runs in behind. That just comes off the top of my head. But gosh, there's so many people. Katie Naughton on defense for the Dash. I thought she held it down for them. And I mean, the Dash took me by surprise. I'm definitely not going to downplay that. I did not have them winning. A huge piece of that also is the evolution of Shea Groom, not just sticking her up top in the middle and saying, hey, run. Acknowledging that she has more foot skills and more of a soccer smart now, this has been something that's been evolving, but that she can create the plays. I think that's something that helped the Dash so much. And they even have had a ton of change. I mean,
right.
I joked, like, this is not your mom's Dash. Like, this is a completely different team. I mean, they've had a revolving door of coaches, and it seems that they've finally gotten it right. But I enjoyed watching a lot of the teams. I know Portland had so many people opt out, but I thought early on they were really fun to watch. Seeing Bella Bixby really come up big, and then even Britt Eckerstrom, which was not a shock to me. I've known Britt since high school, and I think I tweeted out, she could have been a starter in this league the last 6 years, which as a goalkeeper, it's like quarterback. It's so frustrating because you can be just as good, if not better, than other starters, but really get stuck in that backup role, which is an important role. However, it can get really difficult. And so I was really excited that her skills were showcased with all this expansion coming in the next few years. I'm hopeful that the same thing that happened with Aubrey Bledsoe can happen with her. She finally shows in that backup position, and then she can get pulled up into a starting role and get trusted with that.
That was one of the things I wanted to mention. Yeah, because I did see your tweet. And obviously, as somebody who's been there in the goalkeeper union with some of these players in this league, can you help put it in perspective for somebody like me or just your average fan to understand how difficult it is to not only get but hold down a starting job in this league at the goalkeeper position? Because you're just so limited in your options, and you saw it all over the place with phenomenal goalkeeping. Not only Houston and Caitlin Sheridan and Sky Blue all the way down. We saw multiple goalkeepers in Portland. Just what that's like, because it's so different than your other leagues where you've got 20, 30 teams, or you're playing 3 different competitions a year or something like that. It's 9 teams right now, and you're playing for one competition pretty much.
Yeah, it is. I like to say it's just a different sport, goalkeeping. It is a different position, yes, but there's a whole other game behind the game. And a lot of politics play into that. We've seen, especially in U.S. soccer, unfortunately. But I think that it's different across the board. That's what's difficult as well. Like a Kaylin Sheridan came into a very not good Sky Blue team and had a record amount of saves, which I always explain to people, like, you don't want to break the record for number of saves.
Right.
That's something my husband said, like, you had a record of saves in college. I'm like, that's not a good stat. You know, you want low amount of saves and low amount of goals, not high amount of saves, average amount of goals scored against. So I think that as that Sky Blue team evolves, someone like Kaylin Sheridan's skill set is just going to get more refined. It's really difficult as a goalkeeper also to not have a defensive unit that you really have a trust with each other, because your decision making then, instead of thinking like, I know this is the right decision as a goalkeeper, you now have to factor in, but this defender, what is she about to do? And if there's not that consistency there, it's really difficult. As we saw, Sky Blue had an injury in center back. And I know Skrosky, I played with Skrosky, and I absolutely love playing behind her. I think she's a fantastic defender. But you could tell that those reps hadn't been there necessarily this year. And so that there was a little bit of maybe distrust there, whether that is just me seeing the game from my perspective or not. But I mean, then you've got national team goalkeepers that are in and out, and that creates a very difficult position for the next keeper in, because you can have the game of your life when they're gone, and they're still going to start when they come back. So, and that's in every league everywhere. You know, you're always going to have that. And I think that, I think it's very difficult to break into that position. When I explain even my own personal experience in the league, like my first year, I was playing behind Hope and Haley Kopmeyer. And when Hope was away, Cop and I both suffered some injuries. And so it was at one point, I was starting and Haley couldn't even travel. And now we're calling somebody up who wasn't even with the squad to just come sit the bench. And so you can take down an entire goalkeeper union like that. I mean, because the training is so intense, you can't really back off your training as much as you're doing load management with players. So I could talk for hours about how it's a different position, but overall, I thought the goalkeeping was amazing all across the board throughout the tournament. The one thing I feel like I really need to see change, and this also comes down to goalkeeper training. You don't know what the quality of training is like. You don't know if they have someone coming 2 days a week, if they have a consistent goalkeeper coach there, what their level of knowledge is as a coach. The decision-making's got to be better. I thought there was a lot of times where goalkeepers were just out of position, or maybe didn't make the right decision and it put them in a bad spot. But when that decision-making was spot on and the positioning was good, we saw some amazing saves.
Yeah, definitely. And I also want to touch on sort of what it means for North Carolina to go out early in this tournament. And I was not high on Houston, just like you. Very much took me by surprise as well. So what do you think it means for this league that, you know, not only did North Carolina not win every game, North Carolina didn't even come that close. You got two teams that, well, you know, Chicago has been there before in these kind of playoff situations, but it's just a different look when Chicago's playing Houston for a trophy in this league. So how important do you think it was moving forward that, you know, North Carolina's been just so dominant since they've come in, but now you've got something different and a Houston team full of confidence and some really good, you know, Sky Blue played much better in this tournament. What do you think that means for the league moving forward, that it's not just North Carolina anymore?
I think it's great for the league. I think it's unfortunate for North Carolina because they're obviously an incredible team, as we've seen. But I think that it shows that the league is evening out a little bit. And it's not just the teams that have the most money to allocate. And really with this league, how the financials go, it's not the team that can afford to lose the most money. You're now seeing that teams are evening out. You're distributing talent a little bit better. And I think that it's good for the league that a Houston Dash team wins, and that a North Carolina, like you said, doesn't necessarily win all of their games. I think that it's great to bring in new fans, that when they say, oh, like, who should I, root for? You can't just say, oh, Portland, North Carolina, they'll be in the finals, or back in, early days, 2014, 15, 16, where you'd almost always go to Seattle, Portland, or Kansas City, those three teams, those are probably going to be your top dogs. And I think that it's great, and it gives other players an opportunity to showcase their talent. And it makes the league more competitive, which is what the league needs, is more competition. You're not now, I know when I played for Sky Blue, everybody came to us and it was like, okay, we're getting, points on the road. And now you're not getting automatic points when you play any team here. You've got to come out and you've got to have a game plan, and you have to stay together in order to really earn your points.
And you also mentioned the expansion that's coming now, which was part of the point you made in that tweet, is more opportunities for players. So
Yeah.
what does it mean that you're bringing in a Louisville team, and then this LA team has a very similar feel to LAFC with the loaded ownership group, the national team experience? They're going to do things right. So how much and how excited are you? How much of an impact do you think it's going to have, and how excited are you to see a couple extra teams, which means that many more roster spots and things evening out even that much more?
I think we're going to see, the league grow even more now. Like you mentioned, the loaded ownership team. Like I mentioned, being pregnant and kind of being I was coaching soccer up until a year ago, but this last year I've been a little bit removed. Obviously have tons of friends involved in the sports, so I'm still in the know, but I did not see that one coming. I didn't know about that. I had heard rumblings, but like you mentioned, the ownership list, that helps draw in. I don't even know where to start. You're drawing in celebrities, you're drawing in star athletes from other sports, you're drawing in new interest into the league, and it's going to get the recognition it finally deserves, which is going to lead to more marketing, which is going to be huge for this league. Already, the amount of sponsorships and marketing that came in for this tournament with Budweiser and Secret, and Google. There was a ton of other things. That's what the league needs. They need people to invest, and so now we're seeing a huge group of people say, "Hey, we want to invest in this. Let us." And I think that's going to help the league so much more. Louisville is going to be such a great spot. I know they have a really deep tradition of soccer, and I think that that's going to be a really cool site, and you're getting teams closer now to North Carolina, so that eventually, hopefully, we can create some type of divisions where you're playing like in conference or in division, and it can lead to even more rivalries. I know that the rivalries in the past have been either forced because of the players on the team and it's very personal, or forced because obviously you have the Cascadia with Portland and Seattle, and then you've kind of lost the Western New York Sky Blue, and it's kind of created, they've forced something with the spirit. And when you play a team 4 times, it becomes a rivalry in that sense. But I think now you're going to see some true rivalry starting to be created, which draws in more fans. I know I keep coming back to that, but these women on these teams deserve to have those eyes on them. And so I think it's going to be so fantastic.
And speaking of fans and eyeballs, I also wanted to get your thoughts on sort of the recent developments here. So Sam Mewis is going to Manchester City. It sounds like it's almost a done deal, at least for a little while, and there's a good chance Rose Lavelle joins her. Are you at all concerned? Because it's sort of weird. I was thinking about this the other day, that pretty much every U.S. national team member is playing in NWSL right now. It's not unheard of. Alex Morgan went overseas. It's not unheard of to have a couple players playing overseas. But are you at all worried that if you lose your Rose Lavelle, who is sort of the face of the next national team and obviously an incredible established player in Sam Mewis, that's going to take a little bit of the momentum away from the league that they got through the Challenge Cup?
I don't think so, because I think that we've seen, like you mentioned, we've seen so many national team players go overseas, and the league has continued. And like you mentioned, when Alex went overseas, I think a lot of people thought that was the end of the league, because like 10 years ago, if you had asked any average Joe on the street, like name a female soccer player, they'd say Mia Hamm. And then occasionally you'd get an Abby Wambach or Hope Solo. Now, I think if you ask any average person on the street, then when she was going overseas, you'd hear Alex Morgan. And I think that now you're starting to get more recognition, even regionally, because of these teams, that I think that, obviously I mentioned I'm a coach, and when I would coach, when I played, I'd ask players, who's your favorite pro soccer player? And little girls would say, Messi. And I'm like, have you ever seen him play? No. I'm like, okay, name a girl. Well, they couldn't. And now you're having little girls who are like, Kelly O'Hara is my favorite. Midge Purse is my favorite. Or, non-national team players are getting a lot more recognition. And so I think that it could hurt for a little bit because of the fandom. I don't think it's going to overall impact the league's growth. And ultimately, I hope that the league grows enough to where those players are getting substantial paychecks where they want to stay here. But I also say, your career is so short, and if you have an opportunity to go overseas, go. Take it. You can always come home. And I think that's something that every player should get the opportunity to make that decision.
And final thing on this tournament, then I have one other question I want to ask you after, but what do you think, if you could just say one thing, you've mentioned a couple in passing already, but what one thing is going to be most important to moving this league forward and getting it from where it is now to sort of that next level as you bring these new teams in and, right, you're getting these new sponsorship deals and just sort of taking the next step to establish NWSL even more?
My gut wants to say marketing, but it's going to be a TV deal. I mean, you obviously saw 653,000 people watch the final on CBS. And for a while, you're going to get whatever network decides to take a chance on these women, and I know we'll end up on the upside with it. You're going to see the comments where it's like, what even is this? I mean, you're going to see that for a while, but ultimately what it's going to do is draw people in, and they're going to see that this isn't MLS. This game is much different. And that's actually something that my husband, we watched a couple MLS games and he couldn't make it through. He's like, they're just standing there, not to hurt any boys' feelings, but he's like, they're just kind of standing around. Oh, they're on the ground again. Oh, they're on the ground again. And then we'd watch an NWSL game and he's like, whoa, we're already 20 minutes in. And I'm like, yes, the movement off the ball, the runs, like the game just goes and goes and goes. There's really no stopping. There's controlled possession. But I think that had we not had CBS, we paid for the app.
Yeah.
But I think that you're always going to have people complaining for $6 for an app. But I mean, ultimately the product will be there and people are going to want it. So I think a TV deal is going to be massive, and I think it needs to be a big deal. And some people need to, they need to step up, some executives, and say, like, we want to invest in this because it's going to be worth it in the end. It only elevates the every 4 years. You know, we always hear that, oh, people only care every 4 years. Okay, well, if you have a league playing every single year, then you're going to make a lot more money on those every 4 years. You're going to get even more viewership. So I've never understood that argument, but I think the TV deal will be huge because that brings in the marketing itself.
Yeah, and every league, it's about the TV deal first, right?
Exactly.
That's nothing specific to NWSL. The final question I want to ask you, just because this is an opportunity to talk with a former professional athlete, is if there's one thing, whether it's just being a professional athlete in general, whether it's being a professional athlete and married to another professional athlete, or being a female athlete or a goalkeeper or a female soccer player, what's one thing that either sort of you've learned in your experience or that you just don't think people outside of the game who don't have that firsthand experience, like you don't understand about the level you're playing at when you're a professional athlete?
Yeah, that's, there's so many ways I want to go with this because my husband, I feel like we talk about this all the time. I think it's also different men's and women's sports. Right now we're seeing in baseball, with all of the discussions that went on before they finally realized with the league, the misunderstanding is that all of these athletes live this crazy glamorous life. And I think that there may even be a misconception with that on the women's side. And obviously there's still so much work to be done for equal pay at the US level. But I think that once that kind of happens, then we can trickle down to be helping the NWSL raise their salary cap even more. When I was playing, I had no money. I think there was an article, my first professional start, I had $35. That was it. Like my parents could not help me. I chose this life and I was going to make it work however I could. And I think people don't understand that some of these women are still having to coach teams and get other jobs, and they're not paid in the off season, and they've got to do things to just kind of stay afloat. And unfortunately that that trickles a lot of talent out of the league. So I guess it's kind of that, like that money side of it really for the females, and that it's not as glamorous as some people may think up in their head, but also that these are people, like real people with real issues, and they were playing during a global pandemic, and they have to think about going home to their moms and their dads who may be high risk. Like there was so much risk involved, but these women are such trailblazers because they believe in this sport, and they want their daughters and their daughters to be able to play this as a full-time paying career, that they don't have to rely on someone else to support them. So that's kind of my answer on the women's side. I think on the men's side, it can be the same. You do have your, you have your Mike Trout contracts, but that is not the norm. Mm-hmm. And I think that people definitely forget that these are people with real issues. But I think those storylines can be continued to be told and draw people into loving the person as well as the player.
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time, Caroline. Congratulations on the upcoming baby. Good luck to the Orioles with everything. Really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me.
And thanks again to Caroline for joining us in the Supporters Corner this week. Really, really appreciate her taking the time to do that. It was just fascinating to sort of see that perspective on, not only as somebody who knows this league really well, knows these players, was aware that things were starting to come into motion, that plans were being put in place, and you heard her talk about the skepticism of can they actually pull this off, and just how impressed she was with the way that the NWSL approached this, and the way that this league has evolved, even in the couple of years since Caroline has been out of it. I just thought it was a fascinating perspective, so I really, really appreciate Caroline being willing to join us this week. When we come back, we're going to look at what's next, featuring, got a busy weekend. MLS is back, quarterfinals start tonight. We got the second semifinal of the championship playoff, and of course an FA Cup to cap off the English season. Don't go anywhere. You're watching Touchline Talk on 110 Sports. And welcome back to 110 Sports Touchline Talk. here on a Thursday. We're going to wrap up as we usually do with our What's Next, starting this afternoon. Talked about Brentford already being through in one of the semifinals of the championship playoff. The second leg of the second semifinal between Fulham and Cardiff City is this afternoon. Fulham took the first leg on the road 2-0. Goals from Jeff Onuma in the 49th minute and Neeskens Cabano in the 91st. Both phenomenal goals, by the way. Onuma was just a great individual effort, and Cabano, I mean, that was as good as you're going to see free kick-wise. They were not necessarily at their absolute best, but deserving winners, so they now go home. It's hard to see Cardiff City come back from this. Fulham is the better team and obviously has this huge advantage, but hey, crazier things have happened. This is the playoff after all. And then MLS is back. Tournament quarterfinals start tonight. Kansas City, Philadelphia. There's very little to pick between these two teams. I think this could be a really good game. And if you are looking for young U.S. talent on its way to Europe, this is the game for you. Scouts from, it seems like an endless list of teams, are going to be here because there's already rumored interest. Sporting Kansas City's Gianluca Busio, Philadelphia's Brendan Aronson and Mark McKenzie. I'm not sure Busio starts. Sometimes he does, sometimes he doesn't. He's probably going to get on the field at the very least. I am expecting Aronson and McKenzie to start like they typically do. These are three players who, Busio just because he's such a young talent. Aronson and McKenzie have been really good this tournament. You're hearing Bundesliga, Serie A, Celtic. Big-time European clubs are interested in these three players particularly. It seems like that's the news coming out of MLS's back in terms of transfer talk of players leaving the league. It's those three guys getting ready to move to Europe. So this is an opportunity for you to see them before they make those moves. Who knows when it actually happens? But these are guys who are still very young and teams in Europe are already really high on. And this is just a good matchup. I'm gonna go with Philly just because, as I've talked about before, we haven't seen a comprehensive performance from them yet. And Kansas City's been good at times, poor at times. They just haven't been able to find that consistency. So I'm gonna say Philly goes through. But this is a really interesting matchup for me in the quarterfinals. I really like this one. Then we go to Friday. Only one game to talk about here. That's Orlando City and LAFC. Surprise, surprise. I'm going to pick LAFC to go through. My question is the same as it was on Tuesday with this team is, can somebody make things ugly and do enough in the midfield to disrupt what LAFC is trying to do, disrupt the press? Can somebody get a hold of the ball and maintain some possession so that this team doesn't just break you down time after time again? Can somebody be smart enough to not hand LAFC goals like Seattle did? I'm just not sure that team was Orlando. You also are without Don Dwyer for the rest of this tournament, however long that lasts. He didn't exactly have a good tournament when he was healthy, but he's another weapon, and you need all hands on deck in this game. He's not going to be available. I would be shocked if Orlando pulls this off, but if they're going to, it's going to be because that midfield does its job, that Nani takes control, makes the difference, and gets Orlando on the ball some, because you just can't sit there for 90 minutes and let LAFC come at you. You've got to either be able to counter, you've got to be able to make things ugly. That back is still vulnerable. It's not like they aren't giving up chances, but you just got to be on the top of your game in every sense, and I'm just not sure Orlando has enough. And finally, Saturday, big day, as pretty much every weekend is with this sport, which is wonderful. Starting with the FA Cup final, Arsenal-Chelsea. The consequences here are rather significant, aside from just lifting the FA Cup. Arsenal wins, Arsenal goes to the Europa League. Chelsea wins, Wolves go to the Europa League. So there are serious ramifications here. Of course, this would also mean if Chelsea can come up with this win as well. Frank Lampard in year one, when not much was expected of his team, is going to then have Champions League and a trophy. And a top 4 finish in the Premier League. I mean, there are very few teams happier with how this season turned out. And I would, than Chelsea. And I would put Chelsea right next to Liverpool in the number 2 slot there. With Manchester United probably 3rd. But there's still work to do. But this is, if they can come away with this trophy, that's above and beyond what you could expect in Lampard's first season. Arsenal, again, sort of the same idea. You're building some momentum. Can you get your first trophy with this new regime and Mikel Arteta? Get some confidence going into the next season. Maybe it convinces Aubameyang to recommit. Who knows? And, Arsenal has a history with this trophy. It matters. You want that Europa League to get that experience, to get that revenue. This is a big deal for both teams. And, of course, it's your London rival, and it's an FA Cup final. It's, again, one of those games that you just mark on your calendar. Everybody's going to be ready to go. MLS-wise, our last 2 quarterfinals, San Jose, Minnesota. San Jose has been really good. And Minnesota has found a way without Ike Opara. I'm going to take San Jose in this game based mostly on form, more than anything else. Minnesota found a way to get through against Columbus in a shootout, which I just don't put all that much stock in because it's just a toss-up. But it does matter that you beat Columbus, who is in as good as form as any team in this competition. But I'm going to say San Jose gets through. And then NYCFC Portland, which to me is sneakily the best game of this knockout round. NYCFC is full of confidence right now. And the question with Portland is at the goalkeeper position. Portland had that game against Cincinnati within their grasp. They were up a goal after Cincinnati had one ruled out correctly for offsides. They were in control of the game. Didn't look like anything was going to happen. Steve Clark makes a mistake. He takes a bad touch. It's just hard to figure out what he was trying to do. Ends in a penalty. Cincinnati almost wins the game. But Portland gets to a penalty shootout. Steve Clark sort of redeems himself. And they're through, which is at the end of the day all that matters. All I know, though, is that NYCFC attack playing against Clark, who's got to be shaky confidence-wise, I really like NYCFC's chances here, so I'm going to pick them to win as well. That's our show for today. Chris Brown's coming up in just over an hour with Around the Bases to talk about all of the chaos in Major League Baseball again. Josh Molnix will be back here at 11 Eastern tomorrow morning to round out the week here on 110 Sports Live. We'll be back Tuesday. Full reaction to FA Cup, MLS Cup quarterfinals. Sorry, MLS is back. Excuse me. Quarterfinals. Everything that's happened over the weekend. Again, thank you to Caroline Means for joining the show today. Really, really enjoyed that interview. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you Tuesday.